for the second. India have won the Test match.
Hello, everyone. This is the 81 All Out podcast. I am Subash Jayaraman at Cricket Couch. And I'm joined by two very sharp minds in cricket and law. First, it's Suhrith Parthasarathy, and he practices law in the Madras High Court, and he's a keen cricket follower. Hello, Suhrith. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me over, Subash.
Pleasure. And we have Kartikeya Date, who is a regular at this podcast at Cricketing View, who observes cricket quite closely and has written many essays and columns pertaining to the laws of cricket. Since laws of cricket is the topic of the day, is all the rage right now, following the occurrences towards the dying moments of 2019 World Cup final at Lord's between England and New Zealand, we thought it would be a good idea to have these gentlemen on the show to discuss some of the finer points of a couple of the laws that appear to be more contentious than others amongst the game's followers. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure having you both. Before we get going, I have a quick question to both of you. I'm not sure if you saw the game between England and Bangladesh, where Jofra Archer bowled a delivery to Shoma Sarkar. The ball hit the top of off and flew to the boundary without being grounded. Say if there was a physics-defying occurrence there where the bail sits back in the groove, is that a 4 or a 6?
6 byes? I don't know.
6 byes. 6. Okay, according to law 1972, it is actually 4 byes.
Okay.
Good. I just wanted to get you guys, nice and primed. So anyway, coming back, the big discussion after the final is Law 19.8. On that, so was the right decision made? Was the Simon Tongfull commented saying that the on-field umpires made a mistake. So what is your take on it? Should they have reviewed evidence before they made the call, gone to the third umpire, etc., rather than just the discussion between them? Should it have been 5 or 6? So there's a whole lot to unpack just from that one instance. Kartikeya, since we'll speak from the cricketing point of things, I think it's only fair that you get the discussion started.
I don't think it's ambiguous. I mean, it should have been 5 runs, and more importantly, I think Adil Rashid should have been on strike for the next ball, that's I don't think there's it's not a gray area in the law, and I don't think there are that many sort of marginal cases which arise, at least within this type of situation. Because one of the things about this episode, this overthrow situation, is that in the same way that bowled and LBW are two different types of dismissal, runs and boundaries are two different ways of scoring in cricket, and this is a distinction which exists in the law but is not, I think, appreciated as much as it should be, because a run is defined based on what the batsmen do, right? The batsmen have to cross each other and reach the other end for one run to be completed, right? Whereas a boundary is defined based on where the ball goes, right? If the ball goes and is grounded beyond the boundary, then it's 4 runs if it has first bounced within the field of play. And if it hasn't, then it's 6 runs if it's hit from the bat. And if it's not hit from the bat, it's always 4, right? So this is an important distinction, right? Because what it does is that it signifies that, firstly, one implication of the fact that a boundary is scored is that that ends the play. The ball is dead at the end of that. And once you have that, then there's a provision within the boundary law, which is law 19, and the run is defined in law 18. So there's two different laws. Law 19 has a provision for overthrows which go to the boundary. And there, the overthrow is defined from if the overthrow goes to the boundary, then in that case, the significant moment is the moment when the throw is made, right? It is not the moment when the throw reaches the bowler's end or the wicketkeeper's end. It is the moment when the throw is made, right? And so it's the same as if a batsman hits the ball to the boundary and the ball goes to, say, the cover boundary, and while the ball is traveling towards the cover boundary, the batsman run like 2 runs. Then if it goes for 4, the batsmen don't get 6 runs. They get only 4 runs.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The 2 runs are cancelled out because the event is evaluated as a boundary. From the moment the ball hits, the batsman hits the ball, to the moment the ball crosses the boundary, everything that the batsmen do in that intervening time is sort of set aside.
I mean, in this case, I would say, the act, just to borrow the word from 1908, is that the act of scoring was the batsman hitting the ball. They have to run until somebody feels the ball and throws it again. Then it becomes a separate.
Then it goes to 1908. Yes.
Then you add 3 plus 4, like it happened in one of the Ashes Test match.
So, but the point that I think. I don't look. There's a whole. Clearly, it happened in the last over of the match, and so a lot of people are sort of really. A lot of people are very invested in either England winning or New Zealand winning, and so clearly, the fact that this is a mistake which happened in the last over has caused a lot of anxiety. But firstly, it's hard to say that it was absolutely decisive, right? The only thing which can be said clearly is that instead of New Zealand defending 3 from the last 2 balls with Stokes on strike, New Zealand should have been defending 4 from the last 2 balls with Rashid on strike.
Yep.
That is the only difference, right? It affected only 1 out of the 600 deliveries, that episode. It had no effect bigger than that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I don't think it's fair to say that England won because of that mistake. And I don't think it's fair to say that it ended as a tie because of that mistake or anything like that, or that New Zealand would have won if that mistake had not been made. I don't think it's fair to say that.
I agree. It's difficult for the umpires to ascertain when the throw was made and where the batsmen were in relation to that event.
Yeah.
So, were you surprised, Suhrith, that the umpires did not ask for video evidence, video assistance, not evidence, assistance from the third umpire before they made the decision to award 6 runs and Ben Stokes on strike?
Well, I think the amazing thing is it didn't strike me at the time that they ought to have referred it to the third umpire. But obviously now speaking in retrospect, that seems like the right thing to do, and perhaps they ought to have done that. But before that, before we get into that, just on your first question itself, on whether this should have been 5 runs or 6 runs, I think what we perhaps need to do briefly is to just look at the wording of Article 19.8 of the laws of the game.
Sure.
And because there are 2 things to bear in mind here, and I think there's been some confusion, and plenty of people have been looking possibly at the wrong end of the clause to arrive at, I think, a mistaken conclusion that it should be that the umpires got it right. If you look at the clause itself, the clause says if the boundary results from an overthrow or from the willful act of a fielder, the runs scored shall be any runs for penalties awarded to either side, and the allowance for the boundary, and the runs completed by the batsman, together with the run in progress, if they had already crossed at the instant of the throw or act. Right?
Yes.
So, what this means is that if there's an overthrow, then what you'll get runs, and it results in a boundary, then you'll get 4 runs for the boundary, and whatever runs that you've already completed, and runs that are completed is deemed to include a run which is in progress, so long as the batsman had crossed at the instant of the throw or the act. Now, some people have referred to the act as the act of Ben Stokes, so the ball hitting Ben Stokes' bat and thereafter deflecting to the boundary. And I think this is a very mistaken sort of way to look at the clause. You don't need to indulge in any great act of sort of statutory interpretation or sort of legal interpretation. Really, it's just a commonsensical way of looking at the clause itself. Because the clause makes a distinction between a boundary resulting from an overthrow and a boundary resulting from the willful act of a fielder.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, it was clearly an overthrow, right? And an overthrow can only arise out of a throw. So
Yes.
the only thing that you need to look at here is the instant of the throw. There's no question of an act of a fielder here. The only thing that you need to look at is the instant of the throw.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as video evidence since has appeared to establish, at the instant of Guptill's throw, the batsman hadn't crossed, and therefore they should have only been awarded 5 runs and not 6. They hadn't crossed for the second run, that is, and therefore they should have only been awarded 5 runs and not 6. Now, even if you look at the use of the words willful act, it speaks of a willful act of a fielder. So in any case, it could not have been the willful act resulting out of the bat deflecting from Stokes' bat. I think that kind of takes into account cases where the throw might have been made from the deep, let's say, and there might have been some other act of a fielder which might have resulted in the ball deflecting to the boundary or batsman crossing in the ball deflecting to the boundary, in this case, in the case of 19.8. And therefore, this doesn't sort of come into the picture at all, I think, in the sort of scenario with respect to...
Right. I agree with that completely. That there are two points to be made about this further, which is that that willful act of a fielder thing exists. That you can have a case, for instance, where the ball is hit to the fielder on the boundary, and the fielder on the boundary kicks the ball over the rope, and they do that because they want to ensure that a particular batsman stays on strike, okay, for the next ball or the next over, right? Now, that is a willful act, but it's not a throw, right? They can kick the ball away or something like that, right? The willful act thing is to distinguish it from a misfield, basically. Because this has happened before, right? Virendra Sehwag did it once, and I'm sure it has happened even before. The other thing which has happened is that so many people have this idea that the fact that the ball deflects off Stokes is of some significance.
I was going to ask you that, Kartikeya, which is...
It's not. It has no significance, right? It doesn't matter whether the ball deflects off Stokes or whether the ball deflects off the stumps, right? Okay, if the ball deflects off the stumps and there's an appeal for a run out, then the run out law comes into play, right? Then you have to check whether Stokes is run out, right? But if Stokes is not run out and the ball deflects off the stumps and goes to the boundary,
then it's still 4 plus...
And it's still 4 plus 1. That is still decided by, as Suhrith pointed out, from the comparison of the instant of the throw to whether or not the batsman have crossed for the second run, right? It's worth reflecting on whether there should be a law to ensure that the ball is dead if it deflects off the batsman, right? And this deflection, by the way, can only be inadvertent, because if Stokes is actually deliberately deflecting the ball, then he's out obstructing the field immediately, right? So he cannot deliberately, willfully deflect the ball. It has to be accident, right? Now, if they make a rule which says that, okay, if the ball hits the batsman, the ball is dead, right? Then this will become essentially the way to ensure that no overthrows are conceded ever, right? Fielders will start beaning the batsman, especially late in limited overs innings when everybody is trying to steal extra runs, right? So this is one of the reasons why, even though it feels unsatisfactory, I think the way the law is currently is actually the correct way, the correct sort of logical, consistent, system. It fits in properly with the distinction between runs and boundaries. It fits in properly with the distinction between the ball being in play and the ball being dead. Like you cannot just simply add one more circumstance in which the ball becomes dead without considering all the different consequences of that change.
I hope our listener Chirag, who had sent in a question asking the exact thing, because batsmen, if the ball hits them inadvertently, and they, as Ben Stokes also said, he doesn't want to take the run, but the ball went to the boundary. Then the laws are invoked, such
yeah, you cannot just set aside a law because it feels right.
Yeah, right. So this is to Chirag, that I hope that answered your question. Why not to get rid of this law? Because there is an etiquette that you won't take runs of accidentally getting in the way of the ball. And Suhrith, few folks had written in asking about whether there was a possibility of a fan or a cricket board filing grievances with the Court of Arbitration for Sport. Are there any grounds for this at all?
No, I don't think so. Because the Court of Arbitration for Sport deals only with cases where there's an express arbitration agreement referring matters to the CAS. Of course, there are in certain kinds of events, there's an automatic reference to the CAS, such as for the Olympic Games, for example, where almost anything that happens in the games can be referred to the CAS. But of course, there is precedent of the CAS overturning decisions, in the sense that, for example, I think where a cyclist was, just to take one example, where he was his gold medal was denied on the grounds that he had indulged in doping. He filed an appeal to the CAS, that is, he took the matter all the way up to the CAS. And the CAS found that the substance that he had taken was not covered by those that had been prohibited. So it reinstated the gold medal. So it has interfered in very many cases where results have already been decided. And I think it often tends to interfere when, let's say somebody is banned, and then thereafter whether the second or third person becomes the winner and things like that. The CAS has interfered in cases such as this. But in the present case, I'm quite sure that they can't take it up to the CAS for this particular reason. And they're governed by the rules of the ICC, the contract that each of the different boards has with the International Cricket Council. And I'm sure that contract doesn't make a reference to the CAS.
So I have sort of two things about the CAS thing. One is that with cricket, there's a precedent that Mohammad Asif and Salman Butt did appeal their bans to the CAS.
Yeah,
and they did get a hearing. They lost, but they did get a hearing.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, there's this sense that who has the standing to appeal such a thing in a hypothetical case where they may want to appeal it. Does the board have the? I assume that the New Zealand Cricket Board or the Indian Cricket Board or whatever cricket board wants to make is like you have to be an aggrieved party. No, you cannot just say that I'm a fan and I'm very upset that my team lost and I think it was unfair and now I want to be made whole again. You can't say that, right?
So certainly not. I think in this case, hypothetically assuming that the CAS does have jurisdiction, and I have my doubts over whether they would have jurisdiction over something like this. I mean, I'm not an expert, particularly on the field itself, but certainly if somebody had to take it to the CAS, it would have to be the New Zealand Cricket Board, and presumably, I don't know, right? It's quite possible that within the structure of the ICC, in the contracts that the various countries enter into with the ICC, perhaps there is some reference to arbitration, because obviously with respect to disputes between different boards, disputes between a board and the ICC, there has to be a dispute resolution mechanism. And I'm fairly certain that dispute resolution mechanism would entail arbitration of some form or the other. And it's likely that was the basis for Amir and Asif and Salman Butt taking it to the CAS. But you would certainly have to have legal standing and what we call locus standi, which is that you need to be an aggrieved party.
Yeah. So it's. I mean, clearly a lot of this sort of is because of anxieties coming out of feeling bad that some team that you wanted to win has not won, right? But
I mean, that's natural.
Feelings are running high, clearly. I mean, feelings have run high. I don't think...
I also think, in a case like this, it's not merely a question of whether the law was incorrectly interpreted or the umpires got it wrong on the field. I'm sure you'll have to show something beyond the umpires just getting a decision wrong, right? You'll have to
Exactly. There has to be some deliberate action to...
Yeah. It's not just they made an honest mistake. I don't think that's enough, right?
Yes, I would say in any court of natural justice, I don't think that will fly. You have to prove that there was umpires were in on it or something like that to deprive New Zealand opportunity.
Some malpractice or something you'll have to.
Look, I mean, if the umpires had acted with sort of blatant prejudice and that there was some bias on their part, then I think that there would certainly be a case for setting aside the result, right, as a whole.
Yeah.
But
that's a good thing with international umpires not having Twitter accounts. Because you can go back 5 years ago and say, you did say something about Kane Williamson's beard. No. So, anywho, people say, I know what the law says, but I don't agree with it because it doesn't seem fair to me. It doesn't make cricketing sense to me. And the larger question of cricket and its laws, self-consistent laws, and the laws of the society governing the people that play cricket. How does the dynamic between those two systems?
Well, I mean, I think sort of I tend to think that the laws which govern a sport constitute the sport, whereas the laws which govern society do not constitute society in the same way. I mean, in the sense that you can have anarchy and people would still exist, right? Whereas without the laws of cricket, there would be no cricket. They would be doing something and you would not be able to tell what they're doing, right? So I think that sort of there is no notion of cricketing sense except outside that which is constituted by the system of the laws of cricket, right? So there isn't sort of some formless global sense of justice or fair play which exists and is relevant within the system of it's just a set of laws. It's a set of rules which decide the terms of a competition, right? There's no natural, they're all arbitrary. But I think as far as the question of society and stuff, I think Suhrith can speak to that much better.
Yes.
So I left him the much harder part of your question.
Suhrith, as practitioner of law written in society through constitution and all that, and also a follower of cricket. So how do you see it, since that's your day job?
I agree completely with what Kartikeya said, but I do think at the same time that there's quite a bit that law can learn from sport and vice versa, in the sense that, before I sort of get to that itself, look, in jurisprudence generally, there are two sort of larger concepts, right? One is the idea of natural law, and the other is the idea of legal positivism. And sort of the great positivist scholar was H.L.A. Hart, who sort of propounded this theory of positivism and sort of brought it to life, really. And he actually saw cricket and the laws of cricket as sort of, he clearly sort of was able to distinguish it and bring about and was able to realize that it's rather different from how law in the real world or in reality would work. And I think Alok, if I'm not mistaken, had an article on this in the Cricket Monthly some time ago. But he sort of repeatedly makes this reference to the laws of the game to kind of speak to how law would work in society, right? And in terms of how law is what the law is meant to be, or the law is what is written as the law. And it's not sort of something which arises naturally out of, which is either God-given or it's intrinsic to human beings or some sort of thing, that it has to be written by the sovereign in some way, right? And the laws of cricket in this case are written by the people who run the game of cricket, and or at least the ones who used to run the game of cricket. So So in that sense, there is some sort of similarity in terms of how I think the laws of cricket work in terms of laws of real life work. But I mean, I agree with Kartikeya in the sense that one can't look into ideals of natural justice and things like that. I mean, because if you have an unfair law, for example, in real life, there would be many who would propagate an idea of civil disobedience and who would say that we don't have to follow this law because it's unfair, that it violates sort of ideas of human dignity or whatever. So you can't obviously play the game of cricket and say that I don't want to follow this law, that this particular law is unfair, right? Then the entire game would sort of be brought to a standstill and be brought to an end. Whereas in the case of regular laws, if a law is unfair and you don't follow it, that doesn't mean that life itself comes to an end. Whereas in the case of cricket, if you don't follow the laws of cricket, the game of cricket comes to an end, or cricket as we know it comes to an end. And I think that really is sort of the distinction that we need to bear in mind in terms of how the laws of cricket operate. In terms of interpreting the laws itself, I think even interpreting laws of cricket kind of lends itself to how one might interpret, say, a statute. I mean, obviously, interpreting a statute would have real life consequences as opposed to consequences, let's say, in the case of cricket, where just on the game itself. That's where the difference lies. But in terms of how one must go about this job of interpreting, I think there's quite a lot to be learned from how one interprets a regular law.
Right. I think that's a really very good way to put it. Because and it's Suhrith pointed to sort of a political process to change or make it known that you think a law is unfair, right? Mm-hmm. And technically that does not exist in cricket, but in practice, like for example, if you think about Baby declaring at 96 for 5 because he thought the bowling was intimidatory, mm-hmm. right? If you look at that is sort of a protest. He's willing to concede position in the game because he thinks something unfair is going on. Inzamam and Pakistan not coming out to play after tea on whatever day it was at the Oval 2006. That's also a protest, right? And they actually conceded the game in the end, right? But that sort of protest is sort of more about the actions of the opposition than about sort of the fairness of the law itself. That's sort of saying that, well, there is a law and you're not applying it properly, and we do not agree with the way you're running this particular game, and so we are going to protest. So that has happened in the game. That has happened in cricket before. Mm-hmm. But it's not sort of there isn't a mechanism within the game for players to sort of, have a negotiation about the laws during the game. Even I don't know of any sport which has that.
I mean, I don't think you can do that. Unless you're playing Calvin ball, where the laws of the sport keeps changing based on what Calvin thinks. I don't think any more sport, professional sport or even amateur sport, has that sort of thing. We go back to the same Ben Stokes incident. There is a beauty to the law, elegance to the law, which clearly distinguishes the intentional and the unintentional aspects of it. If it was intentional, you would be out obstructing the field, as Kartikeya mentioned. So there is a penalty associated with intentionally doing something that you shouldn't be doing.
Right. I think in cricket, I think law 34 or one of those comes into account where you strike a ball twice and you do it intentionally.
I think this can be summarized by what KD mentioned in a previous conversation, which is that cricket laws, they need to be precise and need not be seen to be fair from the point of natural justice. They need to be self-consistent and applicable within that system of laws of that sport. That's it. Nothing else matters.
I think it's like any other sport, really. I mean, if you look at tennis, for example, which you have the laws of tennis, and to fit, the way to serve, it doesn't necessarily have to be an overhead serve. It can be an underarm serve. And we're seeing that increasingly these days. The Australian tennis player Nick Kyrgios has used it as a tactic. And even in his second round match against Nadal at Wimbledon, he served an ace. A lot of people consider that unsporting, or but it exists within the laws of the game. It's similar to sort of the famous underarm delivery, which Greg Chappell had Trevor Bowl, which was permitted within the laws of the sport. And obviously, they later legislated on that because they thought that it needn't be permitted. But
I mean, that's a brilliant point. Since we are talking about fairness, natural justice, and the laws of cricket, here cricket laws followed a sense of fairness that, hey, it is assumed that you will bowl overarm. So they legislated underarm bowling out of cricket. Tennis hasn't done that with underarm serve yet, but they might still do because it's only a sport. So do you have any comments on how laws of cricket also, in some cases at least, tend to follow in the footsteps of natural justice and fairness?
I don't know how natural the justice is. I mean, it's just at that moment it seemed wrong, right? And then I was just thinking when Suhrith was giving these examples, and I thought of this. It's not about the laws of the game, but within rules of tournaments, there's sort of a number of Mickelson-like examples where the question of even if it is legal, is it right to do this? That question does come up. Like West Indies in the Australia in the 1999 World Cup, they were chasing like a very small total against West Indies, but they took like a long time to do it because they wanted to help the West Indies net run rate. Because they would have benefited if West Indies also qualified along with them. And they would have been hurt if the West Indies didn't qualify. And so technically they manipulated the situation to their long-term advantage and got a less lopsided victory against the West Indies than they could have. Right. Similarly, in one of the recent Olympics, I don't forget which one, it was either Beijing or London. I think it was either one of the badminton teams. They were in a league, and their players. It was like the team competition, and they were positioned in a league table, and they wanted to play against one particular opponent in the next round, and to ensure that, they actually tanked their doubles match in the competition, and they got eliminated because of that. Because even though they were doing it to improve their position in the side in the tournament, and they were doing it because they thought the position to be achieved from winning was worse than the position to be achieved from losing. This was considered unsporting by the authorities in the Olympics, and they were eliminated. So this is not I don't want to sort of have. I don't want to say that morality and rightness and wrongness is irrelevant, but I think that there's a distinction between a genuinely moral question and sort of partisan anxieties. And I without wanting to sound unkind, I think a lot of the anxieties most often are due to partisan reasons.
But, I mean, I wonder whether if Trevor Chappell had bowled underarm in over number, 41 instead of the last over, the last ball, when New Zealand needed 6, whether the law would have been changed at all. Because it's no different from Nick Kyrgios serving in the 4th game of the first set.
But, I mean, let's take that's a really interesting question, and I don't know how to evaluate that counterfactual, because we often, you're right that when something happens in a flashpoint, that's when it tends to have a huge impact, right? Even if it's ultimately a fairly trivial thing. But even with the obstructing the field rule, they tightened that rule recently to say that even if the runner changes direction to sort of increase the likelihood that the runner will intercept the throw, even though he's clearly not explicitly deliberately trying to run into the way of the throw, even if that there's a change of direction, it is out obstructing the field. So they have made the obstructing the field law much stricter against the batsman recently. So even in cricket, there is this sense that there's a perception that things are there's a perception that when things appear to be unfair, they are corrected. On the other hand, sometimes there are also corrections in favor of entertainment, like most famously in the way that they legalized the switch hit. Because it was deemed to be an entertaining shot. I mean, they even said that, it's a very entertaining shot. It's a great innovation. And so we are going to explicitly allow it, So I don't know that it's interesting to think about what concern is addressed in sort of when the law is updated. It's never a concern to say that, well, one team is being penalized. It's always saying that either the batsman is penalized more or the bowler is penalized more, or and there's some unfairness in the balance between that contest. So that's the only thing that they probably they're prepared to correct for, I think.
Fair. I want to introduce another topic, and I'm sure this is bound to be contentious, which is that there have been other instances. This is not the first time that anything has happened that is controversial. There was mandating anytime, even though it is a perfectly legitimate form of dismissal. A lot of the ex-players of particularly certain persuasion, get really bent out of shape. That's one. And two, we have had situations where, a batsman walks out of the crease not knowing the ball is dead, gets run out, appealed, umpire give him out, and then the spirit of cricket makes the appearance. How does from the player's point of view, from the umpire's point of view, the law's point of view, obviously law is blind to spirit of cricket, except it is invoked in the preamble, but the law themselves are blind to the spirit of cricket. How does a player manage both these obligations here, or there is just only one obligation?
I mean, I would think there's only one obligation, which is to play the sport within the laws and try and win the game of cricket, right? I mean, and it's that's your first obligation. Now, when we look at the preamble to the laws, and you mentioned, Subash, how the preamble talks about spirit of cricket. But I don't think the preamble to the laws speaks about spirit of cricket in the manner in which it often appears to be invoked by people of different persuasions. I mean, I think some of the people who are celebrating England's victory today were the same ones who were sort of riling against Ashwin for using the Mankad during the IPL, right? And I mean, and I'm not talking about the batsmen in contention here at all. I mean, I'm talking about a number of other people
people outside the game itself, outside the 22. Yeah,
people outside the 22 itself. And so, but when you look at the invocation of the spirit of cricket in the preamble, it speaks about respect, right? It speaks about respect being, and I'm just reading, I just sort of put it out here. And it speaks about respect being central to the spirit of cricket. It says, respect your captain, teammates, opponents, and the authority of the umpires. Play hard and play fair. Accept the umpire's decision and create a positive atmosphere by your own conduct and encourage others to do likewise. Now, I don't think that doing something within the law in any way would militate against the preamble here, right? The idea here is possibly things such as sledging or where you take it beyond a certain point, which may not be something which is necessarily prohibited by the laws, but which might still not show the necessary respect to the opponent or similarly to the umpire. And it specifically speaks about playing hard and playing fair. Now, if something is permitted within the laws, that would mean that it is fair to invoke such a thing. And mankading, I mean, we don't need to call it mankading. It's an entirely permissible mode of dismissal. And similarly with various manners of runouts, like the Ian Bell incident at Trent Bridge in 2011, where sort of the ball hadn't reached the boundary, but he was sort of dozing and I think it was Praveen Kumar who returned the ball, and they found him short of the crease because he had thought that it was T when it wasn't, and or the Muralitharan run out against New Zealand, where he went to celebrate Sangakkara's 100 even before the ball was dead. And I remember sort of Stephen Fleming at the time came out in support of his team running out Muralitharan, because he said that there's no sort of idea of this being against the spirit of cricket. It's within the laws, and the laws are meant to be used. And so I think ultimately sort of the spirit of cricket, which we need to see sort of pervading the sport, is not a spirit which involves kind of rendering the laws, irrelevant. But on the other hand, playing cricket in a manner which respects the game. And by respecting the game, you try and do everything you can to win the game within the four boundaries of the law.
Kartikeya, I wanted to ask you to expound on, he talked about the spirit of cricket. You perhaps could address the absence of the spirit of cricket.
Right. I mean, I think, look, I agree completely with Suhrith about, the way he's seeing the question of, competitiveness. Part of the spirit of cricket is to actually compete and win under the law. And so, like, if, for instance, take the bunkerding situation itself. If the non-striker is consistently taking advantage and backing up too far, and the bowler knows this, or the fielders know this, and they still don't run him out, then that is actually against the spirit of cricket, because they're not competing as hard as they could. They're not trying to get every advantage that they can, and they should. And very often, this spirit of cricket, especially, that, as Suhrith pointed out, what the spirit of cricket thing actually says in the preamble, and what gets trotted out every time some team somewhere or some player somewhere gets embarrassed, because they're not paying attention or something like that, or they're out in some unusual fashion. Every time this gets, trotted out, it's sort of a device to sort of, help out the guy who's embarrassed, in the sort of in the discourse about how the event should be remembered. It's like throwing mud on the situation. It's like, for instance, I think in the Muralitharan situation, if McCullum had realized that, he's not actually going out to take a run, and if after sort of breaking the bails and appealing, he had realized that, he's not going for a run, he's clearly just going to congratulate Sangakkara. And even though absolutely the run out was fair, it was completely correct, and it was there was no undue advantage taken of anything. McCullum could have said that, okay, well, I realize that he's not attempting a run, right? So I will withdraw my appeal. Now, that would be a professional courtesy which McCullum extends to his opponent, right? But it's one thing for McCullum to extend that courtesy. It's a completely different thing for the opponent to expect such a courtesy, right? That to expect that courtesy is not within the spirit of cricket. It is not within any sort of professional, because then you're sort of implicitly creating an obligation. You're saying, well, this is the way we do things, and this is the courtesy you should extend to me, and I expect that you will extend this courtesy. And if you don't, then you're wrong, right? Then you're not playing properly. That is sort of also wrong, right? But there seems to be no price to all these people who invoke the spirit of cricket whenever something embarrassing happens. Like when Joss Butler is monkered, or a bunch of English ex-players say, oh, well, this is completely wrong. A few other English ex-players say, oh, what's wrong with it? It's perfectly fine. But so the fear of people who sort of seem to want to uphold something like the spirit of the game seems to be some form of a slippery slope argument, where they say that, okay, well, if we do not grant each other these courtesies, then this game will become unbearable. And I'm not actually convinced that that's the case, because the laws are complete and unambiguous, and there is nothing which happens on the cricket field which is not accounted for under some law or the other, or some combination of laws, right? And there is a referee, there's an umpire whose job it is to review the game. Like, for example, batsmen stopped walking a long time ago, and that has not changed. That has not sort of led to a deterioration of the game. The players are still professionals, and they are still competing, and other courtesies are still being maintained. So I don't necessarily buy the sort of the slippery slope anxiety which I think underlies a lot of the fears.
I also think that, it possibly extends to other forms of ingenuity also. If you take an unorthodox action, let's say a bowling action, and it might be a perfectly legal action, but the moment something is unorthodox.
Kedar Jadhav, you mean?
Yeah, Malinga or Murali or whoever,
Yeah, it's immediately seen as somehow being potentially unlawful.
It is a dark art.
Kedar Jadhav is like Trevor Chappell in spirit, if not better.
I want to touch upon one last topic, which is about the umpires themselves. These two umpires on field made a call. As it turns out, was a wrong call, which is okay. Umpires make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, not just umpires. But you have this modern system again where you have the video replay, you have the players calling for reviews. Basically now it's between the player and the umpire kind of contest rather than team to team. There is a question from listener Aftab, which is that if TV umpires are going to be asking for runouts that are not even close or stumping, whatever, or looking for no balls, etc. What is the unintended consequences for every incident or dismissal to be going to video replay? Are there any? And if there are none, could we talk about the authority of the umpire, and is it being eroded by your DRS system? Kartikeya, you want to start because you have done a lot of work on this?
Yeah, I've written some stuff about this. So I think it might be worth comparing how technology is used in football and cricket now that both have used video review in some form. And there's a basic difference. In football, the video reviewer is constantly monitoring the play, and if the video reviewer finds something problematic, then the video reviewer contacts the referee on the pitch and says that, you may want to look at something. Whereas in cricket, it's exactly the opposite. The TV umpire is only involved if invited from the field of play, either by player or by umpire. So, and whether this is because cricket is episodic, whereas football is in some senses not episodic, I don't know. But, cricket has this, what DRS did is that it set up this economy of error, where it said to the players that, well, okay, you want to dispute the umpire's decision, you can dispute first it was like you can dispute 3 decisions in an innings wrong, up to 3 decisions in an innings wrongly. Now it's 1 decision in an inning wrongly. So the terms of the economy have changed, but it still remains an economy of error. And we saw this again in the final where, Martin Guptill used up a review and then
Ross Taylor got so on.
Yeah, but the problem with that is that even though there's an economy of error, it's the degree of precision with which evidence is available is constant, right? So for all 50 overs, the Hawkeye is available, and often they show it, right? For every appeal, regardless of whether it is referred or not, it's shown on TV, right? So in any case, they're using it. So I don't know that part of the design of DRS has been vindicated. Clearly it has improved decisions, right? There are not as many mistakes now as there used to be, or not as many mistakes stand as they used to, but even then, I think football has a better approach to this than cricket. But that's just my view.
I tend to agree mostly, and just want to add a couple of things. One is I don't think it'll necessarily affect the flow of the game itself, and I think that might have been the concern of the of some people when they say that there's too much video interference, and that's a concern that's also there in football, that it's somehow the amount of time taken to arrive at this decision, etc., will somehow impede the flow of the game itself. In cricket, I think it's even less of a concern, really. There are some things which I really do think can be taken out of the on-field umpire's sort of decision-making authority. For example, the no ball for overstepping. It really isn't something that's going to take all that much time. That is, and you don't need to restrict it only to those deliveries where a wicket falls, because clearly if a no ball is bowled in a delivery where a wicket doesn't fall, it's still, and it's not called, it's still going to have a bearing on the game, howsoever minuscule one might think it is. So, and by the time, between deliveries, it's hardly going to take any time. It's sort of, you have cameras installed there, it's going to take a matter of 2 seconds. Obviously, there are some cases where the call itself might be very close and it might require a few seconds longer than it would otherwise take. And in such cases, I think the third umpire can have a quick word with the on-field umpire and say that he's just checking the no ball. It's going to take 5-10 seconds longer, so just wait till the next ball is bowled. This is particularly because you have the idea of a free hit in limited overs cricket. I suppose if there's no idea of a free hit, it's not going to make as much of a difference for the next ball that's going to be bowled. But anyways, it's not going to take that much longer. Now, other things, again, like with respect to, say, with an LBW or whatever, you have Hawkeye, which is being, as Kartikeya pointed out, which is in any event being used by TV producers at any rate for virtually every time the ball strikes the pads. And again, you want to leave the decision as much as possible in, with respect to before to the on-field umpire, I suppose. But there's no harm in kind of overturning an on-field umpire's decision, even when it's not reviewed. You don't need to have this idea of a review, right? If you can, I'm not an expert on this. Kartikeya has done far more on this in terms of umpires call, etc. I'll let him answer that. But if you're sort of sure that the ball is sort of not pitched outside leg stump, it's hit in line, and it's sort of going on to definitely hit the stumps, and the umpire's nonetheless given it not out, you don't need to wait for a batsman to review it. It can certainly be reversed, and it's not going to, again, take all that long, right? It's not going to impede the game in any way. So I think there's definitely a case for taking things out of this idea of a referral system and using a system where third umpires actively get involved. It makes the job of an umpire easier. The umpire is there to largely ensure that the game is played within the laws, right? We can't see the umpire as some sort of larger than cricket figure where the umpire is, and the umpire's conventional role is so necessary for us to enjoy the sport. I don't think that's the case. The idea is to ensure that the game is played to the greatest extent possible within the laws of the game. And if video evidence is going to allow us to arrive at fairer results, then I think we need to do everything we can to ensure that it's used in the best possible manner.
No, my initial question was in the terms of authority of the umpire on the field, and I don't believe, Suhrith, that umpire is some larger-than-life figure that governs cricket or makes sure the laws are enforced. I'm not saying that, but there is something to be said about the authority of the umpire, and the two competing parties, sees that as a competent, unbiased entity. Whereas if you introduce more and more tools and gadgets, and that constantly brings into question, I'm talking about this perceived grievances of, this umpire is incompetent, or he's got something against me or against my side, or basically you are pitting rather than one team versus another team, you're pitting one team or player versus an umpire. Umpire is an unbiased party he shouldn't be involved in this contest at all, so to speak.
Look, I mean, I think umpires do a great job, right? I mean, it's an incredibly difficult job which they do as well. I mean, that they do it this well is, I think, quite remarkable. But I don't think that using video evidence would necessarily kind of take away from the umpire's authority. It'll probably allow umpires to do their jobs in actually an enhanced manner, really. It might allow them to look at...
If you use video evidence the way you're using VAR in football, where it's automatically invoked, that's fine, because that's somebody that is on par, which is another umpire that is calling for it, rather than a player challenging the umpire. So those are two different dynamics. If you're just taking the decision of LBW or decision of calling a no ball from the umpire's hand and give it to another umpire's hand that has better evidence, has more, does not have information, and is not burdened by making sure whether there's only 4 people in the circle or 5 people in the circle, and there is no other short practice going on, etc.
Exactly. Yeah, I think umpires are doing far too much right now. I mean, there's
actually what has happened also is that every time some modification to the law occurs, what it seems to do is that it seems to add responsibilities to the umpire's job. Like, for example, Simon Toffel, he once, I think it was in an interview with you only, Subash, in your old show. He was saying that basically even the TV umpire, there's only one TV umpire, and he has to concentrate for every over for 7 hours. And that's a very, very strenuous job. He was saying actually that there needs to be like 2 TV umpires who alternate, over by over. The other thing is, so I think that the Suhrith's point about the umpires being, increasingly burdened is exactly the right one, because that, every time some rule change occurs, he says, well, yeah, the umpire will look for this, and that, whereas, hey, the umpire's already been looking for all these different things, and now you just added one more thing. What is the effect of adding that one more thing on, what the umpire is already responsible for? How does it affect the performance of those things? But the sort of there's a distinction to be made in this question of authority. The umpire is an expert, right? Which means that given correct information and enough time, the umpire will always get to the right answer. That is what expertise means, because the umpire knows the subject, right? The umpire is not you and me. The umpire is not your average guy sitting in the stands, right? They are trained and they have a lot of experience and they know all the laws inside and out, and because sometimes in the heat of the moment, they may misread something, some event on the field, or they may forget to check for something. That can happen from time to time, as it did in the World Cup final, once in the World Cup final, right? But what the technology has done is, it has made information more precise, and so once you do that, what happens is that it sort of locates new errors. Like I'll give you the perfect example. Martin Guptill, Ross Taylor was given out LBW, right, in the World Cup final. And later on, Hawkeye showed that the ball was missing going above the bails by like an inch or 2, right?
Sure.
In the pre-DRS era, he was caught on the crease. He was hit on the back leg. What would the commentators have said? They would have said, oh, that looked really close. There may have been a doubt on height, but that looked really close. That's a fair decision. Whereas now what happens is, now we know that it's a mistake, and that's not a difference of accuracy. That is a difference of precision, right? Now, one of the things that's happened is that this precision has added pressure to the umpires, and what umpires call is doing is that it is trying to manage that precision. Because firstly, the model is providing an estimate of where the ball would have gone if it had not hit the pad, right? So there's a certain confidence to that estimate. Now, technically, that confidence may be sufficient to sort of get rid of the, to say that, okay, fine. But even then, along the edges, that's the reason for umpire's call, because the chance of the estimate being wrong, and when it shows clipping, it's actually equally, just slightly less likely that it would have missed, is far more likely when the call is very tight on leg stump than when it is on middle stump, obviously, because there are two stumps on either side of middle stump where even if it misses middle stump, it's still going to hit the stumps.
Yep.
Right. So there's a sort of the problem of authority comes when, you do not respect the umpire's expertise.
Yes.
Where you think, oh, this is an incompetent person. This person doesn't know what he's doing. And there's no reason to think that. Clearly the umpire knows what he's doing. Most of the time, you don't even notice that the umpire is there for overs and overs. If there are sessions or test matches, you don't even notice the umpire is there. But he's there, and the game sort of proceeds because the umpires are there, right?
Yeah.
So, what the one sort of effect of DRS has been that sort of the kind of situation in which we now say that the umpire is wrong, has become much stricter for the umpire. Like we say that, the umpire was wrong to give Ross Taylor out because, DRS showed it missing off stump, going over the top of the stumps.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a really, really tough standard of evidence. And the point I think that someone like Simon Toffel will make is that if you want to use only ball tracking to judge LBWs, then don't force the umpire to make the original decision in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Just use the ball tracking, right?
Yeah, because those are two different modes of judgment. One is based on his years of being an umpire. Another one is graphic simulation. Coming back to the original point of where we started this whole conversation about the World Cup final and the last over, it would be useful for everyone to remember, anyone that follows anything about cricket, to remember how New Zealand handled all this, because they did not look at one instance and say, like, that is what cost us the final. There was always so many, obviously there is 612 different events, give or take, in terms of no ball and stuff that happened. And every one of them had some or little lot, whatever, had impact on the final. And it will be behoove us to learn from how they handled such a crushing blow.
Subash, that really is the spirit of cricket, right? Which the preamble talks about.
Yeah.
I will say that I think it's true that New Zealand handled it well, but I think every team in this World Cup would have handled it equally well. They are not. I know there's this idea that some of these teams are like completely full of thugs, and other teams are full of angels, and that's not really true. They're all competitive professionals, and they all want to win equally desperately, and they're all like really, really elite professionals. They're not like me or you, or I don't know about you.
No, I'm not saying that some other team would have taken it to the court of arbitration or anything. I'm just saying.
No. I've heard stuff like, for example, I've been listening to a couple of podcasts this week, unusually for me, about cricket. And there's like people saying, oh, can you imagine if like Steve Smith or Virat Kohli had been in Kane Williamson's place? They would have had a 10-minute argument with the umpires about that deflection. No, they wouldn't have. They know the law as well as the umpire, and as well as Ben Stokes. They're not fools. They would not behave badly. It's not like this idea that, we have this. I understand sort of the impulse behind it, like you want sort of some sort of, dramatic, characterization of, all the protagonists in this story, because the cricket itself is apparently not interesting enough. But it's a little unfair to the players, to to do that. I think they're all really good at what they do. I mean,
All right. I know professionals. All right. On that note, it's time to wrap this episode of A2 and All Out. Thanks to our guests, Suhrith and Kartikeya, and thank you all for listening. Please do subscribe to A2 and All Out on iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else. Check out a2andallout.com. Also, a quick shout out to the sister podcast, which is The Other Banana. You can find them at where'stheotherbanana.com. Once again, thanks for listening, and thanks for being on, Suhrith and Kartikeya. Thank you.
pleasure.
My pleasure.
He'll come back for the second. India have won the test match. India have won the series. They're going to get back for two.